Hello everyone, today we will explore the topic of program and space by analyzing the reading text from Juni Palazma and Peter Zumthor's Atmospheres. Architects is a discipline where not only functionality but also atmospheres plays a critical role in shaping experience. Juni Palazma argues that spatial perception is not merely visual, but it also shaping by tactile and auditory dimensions, with perception playing a critical role in the formation of atmosphere. Peter Zumthor, on the other hand, designing atmosphere as a holistic experience that resonates with our sense while skillful balancing it with functionality. Let's listen to Gülin.
When we enter a space, we often experience how it makes us feel without realizing it. But what we call atmosphere is actually a multi-layered formation. The color, material, sound, texture, and even smell of the space. All of these come together to determine how we perceive this place. Right now, when I sit in this room, I look at what makes me feel comfortable. The soft texture of the armchair, the warm tones of the color, and the way the light spread into the space. The light here is neither too harsh nor completely disused. There's a balance that makes you feel the textures and surface of the room. In some spaces, lights or shadows can be disturbing, but here the flow of the lights is a soft depth to the space. This is actually related to space being material and harmonious. In other words, since every surface, color, and texture here is in harmony with each other, they create a single atmosphere. But atmosphere is not just the sum of physical elements. My memories of this place, the time I spent here, and the way I experienced this place also shape the atmosphere. For example, a space gains meaning not only with objects, but also with the movements there. Even the position of the armchair here determines how I use this place. Spaces suggest a certain behavior to us. When I sit here, this environment has a relaxing, inclusive feeling. If I were in a room with more angular, hard surfaces, could I talk about sense of relaxing like here? I don't think so. Because space is not just a physical entity. It's a whole with the things it makes you feel. Space have their own unique warmth. Sometimes, even if it's not physical warm, the material and lights can make it feel warm. For example, here there's an inviting feeling created by wooden surfaces, fabric textures, and the way the light spreads. However, this is missing in some places. You feel it, but you cannot describe it exactly. In fact, we all intuitively notice this when evaluating space, whether you want to stay there when you enter a place or not, is just related to atmosphere that the space offers you. But this place is also connected to the outside world. The glass and the window front illuminate the closeness of the interior and expand the perception of the space. This is important for the boundaries of the space to be clear, but at the same time to remain fluid. You may feel like closed space is suffocating, but if the space offers a transition between the inside and the outside, it becomes more livable. Now, let's go outside from the inside and see how the atmosphere changes. When I go from here to balcony, the atmosphere changes. The air movement, sounds, and the winds here break the stagnation I feel in the interior. Here, the sounds are more pronounced. My connection to the city is strengthened. In fact, the atmosphere is not only related to design elements inside, but also to how the space is limited. In other words, the fact that the space is transitional means that the atmosphere is also variable. The sounds coming from outside The view of the city in the distance, the reflection of lights here emerge as new elements that define the space. What we feel in the space is determined not only by how its space is constructed, but also by how it relates to its surroundings. When I look from here, I see the streets and buildings below, while there is a closed, protected and more controlled atmosphere inside. The movements, sounds and the outside environment are felt more strongly here. Some space completely cut off this connection, while others bring it inside. In order to understand how a space affects people, it is necessary to understand its boundaries and transitions areas well. When we think of the city streets, we can see how the atmosphere is shaped not only at the building scale, but also at the urban level. While some streets create a wide and spacious feeling, others can be cramped and oppressive. When I look outside, there is movement here, a constantly changing atmosphere. When I look here in the morning, evening or night, the feeling I perceive change, because the atmosphere is not static. It is something that changes with time and the environmental factors.
Let's listen to Beyza.
Urban atmosphere is the overall feeling that a city creates in people through its spatial arrangements, material use and sensory effects. According to Palazma, cities are not just physical structures, but places that leave memories and emotional connections through our senses. The main elements that form the urban atmosphere are the first one is materials and textures. Materials used in cities such as stone, concrete and wood define the character of a city. For example, if we think about Ankara's stone buildings, we can say that the city has a tough and strong atmosphere. Another important factor is sounds and smells. The unique soundscape of cities, traffic, street vendors, wind sounds, and smells burning from heating systems, the smell of asphalt after rain, create emotional connection within our memory. The last one is climate and natural elements. The angle of the sun, wind direction, and seasonal change affects the atmosphere and how we experience the city. For instance, the dry, cold, and clear sky of Ankara contribute to the feeling of its spaces. Zamtor, when he says that architecture is the art of creating atmosphere, also argues that the sensory and emotional effects of spaces should be intentionally designed at a scale of a city. The main elements affecting urban atmosphere include spatial hierarchy and public spaces. Squares, narrow streets, and wide boulevards create different feelings in people. For example, there is a big difference between the open feeling of Kızılay Square in Ankara and the intimacy of the narrow streets in Hamamönü. Light and shadow. Night lighting, the play of light on building facades on shaded areas, enrich the urban experience. People and movements. Areas with high human traffic create a dynamic atmosphere, while parks and green areas create a sense of calm. In summary, the urban atmosphere is shaped by how the physical environment affects our senses, our emotional response to spaces, and the different dynamics of public areas. Palazma's approach to sensory perception shows how materials and climate combine with the memory of the city. Zamtor's idea of a spatial atmosphere helps us understand the emotional impact of squares, streets, and light in the city.
Let's listen to Damla.
Hello, today we are here to explore the concept of atmosphere in architecture. Even the sea, sand and sun around us right now create an atmosphere. And this exactly why atmosphere is a crucial aspect of architecture that should never be overlooked. Let's explore it together. In architecture, atmosphere is often considered a visual experience, but it's much more than that. For instance, in the arts such as cinema and music, atmosphere is used much more conspicuously. Gülin Ergündüz says that this atmosphere is not given enough importance in architecture. In fact, some artists like Turner or Claude Monet have created very powerful atmosphere in their paintings. We can also see this in film. Lars von Trier's Lockville shows the power of the space through the use of minimalist atmosphere. So atmosphere is not only visual but also creates an emotional experience. And this is where architecture comes into play. How do we perceive spaces? Palazzo suggested that we perceive spaces not only visually but also intuitively, just like here on the beach. When we hear the sound of the sea, of the feel warmth of the sun, we immediately sense an atmosphere. The same thing applies to architecture spaces. We can quickly sense whether a space is warm or cold, inviting or repulsive. Palazzo also points out that atmosphere is connected to imagination, just like when reading a novel. The scenes that come alive in our imagination. The atmosphere of a space is also shaped by our imagination. That's why a space offers not just a physical experience but also an emotional one. For example, this place is like a scene from a novel. What emotion are we feeling? What dreams are we imagining? These are the moments when spaces gain meaning for us. Architecture, just like a novel, offers an experience shaped by our emotions. Architecture is not limited to visuals. It also involves other senses, such as touch and hearing. For example, here we can feel the warmth of the sand, the coolness of the sea, and the sound of the waves. This sensory experience are very important in architecture. Today, often focuses solely on the visual aspect, preventing us from forming an emotional connection with a space. Says that spatial perception is actually a subconscious process. That is, when we enter a space, we immediately feel its spirit and atmosphere. This sensation gradually became ingrained in our memory. Our mental perception follows our emotion perception. For example, how do you feel on this beach? Calm, relaxed. This is actually what architecture is about, feeling the soul of space. In conclusion, architecture is not just about aesthetic, it's an experiential phenomenon. Perceiving a space involves not only visual but also our intuition and emotions. Just like right now on this beach, architecture creates an atmosphere that takes us on a sensory journey. That's why we should never underestimate the power of atmosphere in architecture.
Let's listen to Hande.
Peter Zumthor doesn't define atmosphere as an abstract concept, but rather as a deeply felt bodily experience upon entering a space. For him, architecture must be sensed not only visually but physically as well. When designing a building, Zumthor begins by creating a messy shadow and then he carves this mess with light. This approach blends aesthetics with function, emotion and practice in a seamless way. Elements such as light, sound, texture of materials, and temperature are fundamental components of a space and form the emotional core of its design. When we apply this approach to a garden, we can better understand how atmosphere becomes an experience. A garden, like an architectural structure, isn't static, it changes over time. Breadth and is shaped by light. Every step, every sound, every texture in the garden contributes to an atmosphere. According to Zumthor, the air in a garden isn't merely an aesthetic element, but a bodily impression, the smell of soil, the sound of pebbles, the comfort of shade. All of these add to the layered atmosphere of the space over time. Just as in Zumthor's designs, the atmosphere in a garden isn't temporary, it is layered. The passage of time and the changing light bring emotional depth to the space. Garden light like the sun, filtering throughout the leaves, is ever-changing, creating a play between light and darkness. This play isn't only visual but also emotional. This depends in a garden becomes a way of living out Zumthor's idea of an internalized space. The materials in the garden, the natural elements, moist earth, rough stones, egging wood, carry the marks of time. Like the Zumthor's buildings, this material is edged game patina. This shows that atmosphere isn't superficial but deep and layered. The feeling of the garden shifts between a spring morning and an autumn evening, each with a unique meaning. According to Zumthor, this feeling isn't achieved throughout a simple plan but throughout meticulous design. In Zumthor's understanding to create atmosphere in a garden isn't to dominate nature, but to think with it, to breathe with it. A garden isn't merely a landscape, it is a ladder rising to the senses. A story slightly told by space. And this story can only be completed by a body that is ready to listen.
Let's listen to Şeyma.
According to Peter Zumthor's approach to atmospheric architecture, the impact of a building on people shouldn't be evaluated solely in formal or functional terms, but as a sensory and existential experience. In this context, tall buildings create different atmospheric effects for both those who live inside them and those who encounter them from the outside. For the inhabitants of tall buildings, the atmosphere is often characterized by a sense of disconnection from the ground and surroundings, considering Zumthor's emphasis on the bodily and sensory connections with space. The vertical distance created by such structures can weaken the existential sense of security offered by the ground, especially in multi-story apartment buildings. Individuals often perceive sunlight and the sky through a limited frame, experience artificial hums instead of natural sounds, encounter neighbors less frequently in physical terms. This weakness, the atmosphere of intimacy, closeness, and belonging that Zumthor values, the relationship with space becomes visual rather than bodily. Architecture may then be perceived merely as visual arrangement, yet for Zumthor, space is a hollow that the body lives within. From the perspective of those observing from the outside, tall buildings are often perceived as foreign, distant, and authoritarian. Based on Zumthor's idea that what you feel when you approach a space determines its hospitality or coldness, tall buildings often stand in vertical defiance of the horizontal urban fabric, suppress a sense of self with their scale beyond human proportions, establish weak relationship with their immediate surroundings. As a result, they tend to create cold, anonymous, and identity-lacking atmospheres. This makes it harder for individuals to form emotional bonds with the space, yet for Zumthor, the essence of architecture lies in creating an atmosphere that resonates deeply with the human being. In conclusion, from Zumthor's perspective, tall buildings often carry the risk of producing sensory deprivation and existential disconnection. Whether one lives inside or views them from outside, the quality of atmosphere depends not just on architectural form, but on the space capacity to engage the senses.
Architects should adopt a holistic approach to spatial design by considering material selection, environmental perception, and the emotional impact of the space, balance, functionality, and sensory experience. Based on the views of Juni Palazma and Peter Zumthor, here are some key strategies to achieve this balance. Plasma argues that architecture should not be seen merely as a visual experience. Instead, that the space should be perceived through senses such as touch, hearing, smell, and even temperature. He states the door handle is the building's handshake, emphasizing that even the smallest details contribute to the atmosphere of a space. Architects can create a sensory experience by considering the tactile effects in material selection, designing acoustics and to shape how sound is perceived, and utilizing natural elements like light and airflow. Plasma notes that space is experienced not only through our direct sight but also through environmental perception. People subconsciously feel the atmosphere of a space. Therefore, architects can guide this perception by using elements like light, shadow, play, the argument of volumes and spatial transitions. In his book Atmosphere, Zumthor advocates that a space should be designed as a holistic conception to evoke emotional impact. Architect is about creating space that resonates emotionally with people, he states. To balance functionality with sensory experience, the technical elements of a structure, its form, elements, and layout, should be in harmony with the emotions the space evokes. Both Plasma and Zumthor argued that material is one of the most important elements in shaping both the functional and sensory aspects of a space. The weight of stone, the warmth of wood, or the reflexivity of glass shapes the spirit of a space. Zumthor notes that materials should not only be chosen for their durability but also for their power to evoke emotions and memories. While a space program determines its purpose and efficient, sensory experience makes the space inviting, meaningful, and impactful. To achieve this balance, architects should design space that consider human movement, encourage interaction, and offer user opportunities to pause and reflect. Inside of reading, efficiency-driven plans, flexible spaces that can adapt to human needs should be created. Functionality and sensory experience are not opposing elements in architecture. Rather, they are complementary escapes. By embracing multi-sensory approach, considering environmental perception, selecting meaningful materials, and creating a holistic spatial experience, architects can design spaces that are both functionality and leave a profound emotional impact.